We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us today for our webinar on that we're calling From Thought to Action, 3 strategies for bringing your strategic plan to life. Want to take a few moments, myself and my colleague Samantha, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Ronnie Banjarian. I'm a consultant at Education Elements. I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and a lot of the work that I've done with Ed Elements has been centered around either personalized and blended learning, data culture, and strategic planning. I have I've had the opportunity to see a strategic planning development process from start to finish with recently with a district in New York State. And we are now in the first year of implementation and monitoring with them. And so all of what we're going to discuss today feels very relevant to some of the work that's actually living out in one of the districts that I'm supporting. And I'll hand it off to Samantha to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Ritchie. I'm also a consultant at Education Elements and recently completed 2 strategic planning products with districts in New York as well, and was able to come up with some really strong templates, tools, and structures around implementation. And today we have 3 objectives that we want to cover with you all today and talk through crafting the right objectives and initiatives, cultivating the right teams for the job, as well as establishing structures to monitor the progress of your initiatives. And like Ronnie was saying, we do have a lot of templates and things to show you that you can bring back to your folks right away, which is exciting.
And then, of course, we'll have time at the end of the session to take questions from folks that are attending. And so if you have specific questions around, building buy-in, and if that's not something that we necessarily touch on in that second strategy, cultivating the right teams, we'll have time at the end to take your questions. Just for the sake of folks on the call that may not be familiar with who we are and what we do, I want to take just a few moments to introduce ourselves and the work that we do. We are Education Elements. We are actually, we've been around for 12 years now. We have partnered with over 1,000 schools and school districts, and our motto is that schools grow when people grow. And part of the mantra that we're hoping to share with you and live out today is this idea of responsive planning. So yes, as a district, as part of the healthy goings on, like the business as usual of a district, is to think about strategic planning every 5 or 10 years. Also thinking about this idea of responsive planning. How can you be really responsive to the needs of your community and your students? We have been redesigning education since 2010, and some of the work that we support and with some of the ways that we partner with districts, in addition to supporting with strategic planning, design and development and implementation, we do all sorts of things, including responsive leadership. We do some work around equity, personalized learning, teacher retention, and data culture. And so if any of these things, are ringing a bell in your head, potentially these are some other ways that we can support you and your district in the future. The first thing that we'd like to do is, and this is something that we're trying out that's new, is we've put together this protocol. You don't have to do it now, but Samantha's going to put a link to the chat in the chat that's going to force a copy so that you'll have a copy of the protocol. One of the ways that we understand strategic planning is kind of the healthy a healthy district, and healthy goings on in the district necessarily include at specific points every 5, 7, or 10 years, just thinking about what are our priority areas. Are we living at our priority areas? And so wherever you are in your journey at the district that you're at or the district that you support, as you're gearing up for the second quarter of school year 22-23, you might consider doing a pulse check. If you are just now maybe starting to consider doing another strategic plan or closing out the past 5 years and maybe doing some adjustments to some priority areas going into the next 5 years, here are some things that we have seen that district leaders and administrators consider some of these indicators as they're starting to think about, hey, is now the right time to start thinking about bringing some of the focus areas of our strategic plan to life as well.
So one of the things to think about with strategic planning is responsive planning. And the plan that you develop needs to be able to prioritize the process over the product, because one of the things that we realize is strategic plans go for a long period of time, 5 years. And so you'll want to be able to have a plan that can sustain, adapt, and pivot as your school and your school's needs pivot, right? There might be things that come up that you'll need to change and adapt. And it's really important to have systems and structures and teams in place that can respond to those changes. So in order to develop this type of responsive plan, we recommended education elements, including all stakeholders or all team members, into a feedback loop. And so what we mean by this is making sure that the teams that you have are intentionally built so that they're all speaking and communicating to each other weekly, right? Whatever the cadence you want to be, to keep folks engaged and to be actively involved in the process, and getting regular feedback, giving one another feedback is important, so that the plan can sustain over time. What you'll want to consider too, as you start to think about these plans and how you want to make this work over time, is asking yourself the current state of your district. How does the current strategic plan live in the district? Are people seeing it? Is it public facing? Do families know about this, right? What was the experience of writing the current plan look like? Was it 5 people at a table and then no one else sees it, right? We want to make sure that the whole community is involved. How would stakeholders describe the plan? How would teachers, other leaders describe the plan? Do they know what the goals are for the next 5 years? And another thing to ask is, how are you monitoring and or wrapping up your current plan? So what are the systems in place to actually put ideas into action? And if any of the answers to those questions are, not sure, or you think that maybe there needs to be some changes made, perhaps you can start to ask yourself, well, where do you hope the district will go in 5 years, right? Do some big picture visioning, like what are we hoping for in 2027? Also, what new initiatives, practices, or structures would you like to see? And then another question you can ask, which is really great, is that you can ask a student what they're learning, right? What will they say? And so putting it into the hands of kids who are experiencing school every day can be a great way to do a pulse check on where you're at with your strategic plan.
Thank you, Samantha. So the first of the 3 strategies is thinking about crafting the right objectives and initiatives. And one of the ways that we found that has been really powerful in understanding what even is a strategic plan is thinking of the anatomy of a strategic plan as a house or a building or a structure, starting with the roof and the awning at the top, all the way down to the foundations of the house. And I'm going to very quickly kind of walk through each of these components of the strategic plan. And then I want to point out where we have found that districts often begin to lag, and then unfortunately sometimes will stop in terms of actually bringing the strategic plan to life. And hopefully some of what we share in the next couple of minutes resonates with you. And if it does, then would love for you, and I'll pause at a specific moments during the next few slides, and would love to collect some thoughts in the chat about, hey, this resonates with me, this happened to us, we created a plan, but we're not really living it out. This is what we did instead, this is the problem, or this is the challenge that we're currently facing. And so I invite you to really use the chat in order to engage with the material that we're sharing as well. And so, going through each of these components of the strategic plan, beginning with mission, vision, and beliefs, we like to think of those 3 as what we call the strategic direction, why we exist, where we want to go, and what we believe in. And usually, anybody that's working at a district is able to articulate those things. This is our strategic direction, or on the district website, this is what we say the mission and vision of our district is. And then when you think about focus areas or priority areas or pillars of the plan for the next 5 years. These are the things that could be 2 priority areas, could be up to 7 priority areas. What will you prioritize in the upcoming X number of years, 3 to 5 years, for example? And then as you go further and further along into the structure, you're thinking about objectives, KPIs, key performance indicators, goals, specific actions that you want to implement in order to live out the priority areas, in order to live out your beliefs, your core beliefs, as well as ultimately so that you can live out your mission and vision. And so we find that with the districts that we work with, this idea of a strategic direction is pretty solid. Often districts that we work with, if we start working with them for the first time, we'll have a pretty solid idea, at least, of what their mission, vision, and core beliefs are. And perhaps they might have a sense of what some of these priority areas are. But usually we find that this is where the momentum begins to lag. And unfortunately, sometimes it can also come to a halt because there is, for any number of reasons, there are challenges and constraints, resource allocation and otherwise. Maybe this is not a priority for the district, or it's tough to prioritize this work in terms of actually articulating the objectives. This is the impact that we want to have with this particular focus area. These are specific projects or ideas or goals or actions that we want to implement. And so we're going to walk you through a process that we have undergone with a few of our districts in the past year or so. So this is cutting edge, but a lot of it might seem familiar. And then we'll also share a template as well that we've used with some districts in the past. And so I'm going to give you an example. We're going to walk through the template. There's a link to the template that Samantha is going to share as well. And by the way, all of the links that we share today will also be included in the follow-up email. So if you missed a link or if you close the tab, that's okay. We're going to share all of these resources in the follow-up email. This one is also a forced copy link. And so it will prompt you to make your own copy, and you'll be able to have a copy that you own, and you'll be able to, add any collaborators or facilitators that you might want. So the idea here is that it's one thing to identify what your focus area is, and it's another to really bring together a group of people that is representative of the community and really define your focus area. For example, one of the districts that we've worked with recently defined one of their focus areas as this idea of clear and targeted communications. That's what came out of a round of community engagement. We supported the district. We went out and held a bunch of focus groups, and we held a few town halls, and we sent out the district sent out a comprehensive survey. And from the feedback that was collected from the community, it came out that amongst 4 really pressing areas that need to be prioritized, this idea of clear and targeted communications from school admin and from district leadership is really, really important for the folks in the community. And so what do we do now? What does the district do now? And so the first thing that was really important for the teams that were the planning teams that were putting this together and hoping to begin to design some experiences to bring this to life is to articulate the strategic objective. Why is this a priority for the district? Why is it that we heard from the stakeholders and from people in our community that this is something that needs to be diagnosed, that this is a challenge that we've been facing and that we need to begin to find a solution for? So articulate the strategic objective, what you heard from stakeholders, and next articulate the impact. And you'll see if you're able to access the document, you'll see that there are in the template, there are blank spots for you to, again, this is just an example, but blank spots for you to actually walk through with a committee, a planning committee or a planning team as you're going through this process. So I have my pillars. I've identified my focus areas as a district. What do we need to do now in order to bring this to life? Next, it's important that you articulate why this work matters. Why is this pillar important to your community? And then think about all of the dimensions that this might be important for your community, thinking about all of the different subsets of your population demographics, thinking about does this focus area promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is this pillar really relevant to the community in the way that we've defined it and described it right now? And so it's important to really spend some time, again, with a team of folks that is as much as possible representative of folks in the community to really tease out some of these ideas so that A, you are thinking about all of the potential roadblocks of why this focus area might not be relevant to our community, but also making sure that you are generating buy-in with as large a subset of your community as possible. Next, something that we like to do is we like to frame these problems or these challenges that come out of stakeholder engagement, that have come out of the survey or from some of the conversations that you've had with folks in your community. We like to frame them as challenge statements. This is a Mad Lib that we sometimes use with districts because it's very straightforward. And so if you think of different subsets of your community as users, so for example, if you're thinking of elementary students at my district, or parents at my district, or community members who do not have children at our schools, these could be subsets of your community. And so you would, begin to craft a challenge statement around one of these users or one of these constituent groups. And then you want to think about their needs. What do they need? Staff and teachers, or maybe high school staff, need differentiated professional development. Maybe that's something that you heard from a focus group with high school staff, and that's something that has come out. And so that's one of the challenge statements that you would articulate. High school staff need differentiated professional development so that insert a compelling reason or an outcome. For example, in this case, it could be so that they extend their practice in the way that they see fit. And so you go through and you think about all of the trends that have come out from the stakeholder surveys and the stakeholder engagement and talking to all of these different constituent groups, and you begin to articulate these challenge statements. What do you do with these challenge statements is you start to think about how you can reframe them as what we like to call how might we questions or how might we statements. As you see on the slide, how might we questions or statements deepen your challenge statements as areas of opportunity. And so instead of saying high school staff need differentiated professional development, and that's a framing of a problem, you might reframe it as how might we support high school staff in pursuing differentiated professional development. In the next couple of slides, we'll give you a few examples from real life districts that we've worked with. So before you begin coming up with ideas around how you can bring this focus area to life, you can brainstorm ideas using this how might we protocol. So we have these challenges, how might we address these challenges? And it's important to think about your locus of control. What actions are you going to take to drive change? So over the course of the next two slides, and I'll take a pause here for a moment to give you a chance to read them. These are a couple of challenge statements and focus areas that have come out from a district that we have worked with recently. And I'll hand it off to Samantha to kind of frame, read through, and give you a chance to digest what you see on the screen.
Yeah, sure. So one of the needs was around student voice and choice. And so the district came up with the statement that students need a greater sense of agency and choice in learning experiences so that they can have more enrichment and well-rounded exposure. So I thought about who the population was, what the need is, and then the impact on that need. And then they came up with how might we statements. And so started to ask questions around how might we bring in community members, retirees, graduates, et cetera, to augment class learning with real world experience? How might we define agency for students? And how might we assure student learning choices are meaningful and further educational goals and outcomes? And so all of these how might we statements are without any constraints. We're just thinking about like, how might we have answers to this question, right? How might we involve other people so that students can have more enrichment and well-rounded exposure? And again, these are just throwing at the wall, right? Anything that might stick and starting to brainstorm and ideate ideas. And another one, just to give you all a high school example, was around rigorous and worthwhile course offerings. And so the need was that the district needs to continue to develop our course offerings to include additional real world experiences so that we create a well-rounded approach to teaching the whole child. And again, some of the how might we statements were, how might we ensure that high school students leave the high school with real life skills, with what they need to succeed in the world beyond just academics, right? So that relates to the whole child. How might we define what we mean when we say the whole child? And how might we provide more functional academic offerings for students of all ability levels in order to provide the best preparation for post-secondary work and life? So again, y'all, just want to name, these are just big ideas that people have come up with, and you can start answering these questions, and it really gives a pathway to start creating ideas around what the strategic plan pillars might look like. Do you want to go to the next slide, Ronnie? Yeah, and so when you all get these slides, which you will get, I encourage you to watch this video. I've seen it like 7 times. It's awesome. But what this woman talks about is or something around divergent and convergent thinking. And when you're divergent thinking, you're brainstorming anything possible. There's no constraints, no limits, no amount of money, no amount of people, just anything in your wildest dreams. You're just thinking about all of the ideas to help you when you have those challenge statements. And then when you're convergent thinking, then you start to think about some of the constraints, right? And so you'll think about how you might make choices towards solution and resolution in the ideas that you want to see come to life. Anything to add there, Ronnie?
I would just say one thing around this idea of divergent and convergent thinking. From a few slides ago, when you saw some of those thought bubbles, those speech bubbles with the 3 how might we statements, those weren't the only ones that came up. In fact, because we followed and those teams that we worked with, those teams followed this process of divergent thinking, they actually came up with 30 plus how might we statements. So like Samantha was saying, no constraints, no holds barred, throwing anything at the wall, just how might we, solve this problem? And then, and Samantha's going to walk you through that process now, is how do we take those 30, 40, 50 statements that are totally unconstrained and think about, okay, what are the actual things that are going to bring this focus area to life?
Yeah, and so this is an activity that you can totally do. What you'll want to start doing is once you have those statements, you'll want to start to ideate and brainstorm within 3 categories. And so you have the in front of us category, beyond the trees and over the mountains. And so once you start coming up with these ideas and the how might we statements, you'll place them on, a poster board, a whiteboard, whatever it is, and think about what are the opportunities right in front of us, right? The low hanging fruit, like the things that are easy to do, feasible, maybe like one person can take it on, and it's not going to require a lot of planning. It just can happen right now, right? A small actionable thing. The next pillar is beyond the trees. And so these things are achievable with some constraints. Maybe it takes some planning. Maybe there needs to be some thought around like the budget, who's going to take this on. And so it has a few constraints, but still achievable over time. And then finally, you'll want to post ideas that are over the mountains, right? Your wildest ideas with absolutely no constraints. And think about maybe coming up with a plan to actually achieve those over the mountain ideas. But it's a great way to start to categorize categorize your ideas and start to bucket them to help you prioritize what might come first.
So as we're thinking about this design process, so you've identified, hey, these are this is the universe of possibilities. If there were no constraints on resource allocation, if we had infinite money, if we had infinite time, these are all of the things that we could do in order to solve the problem that has the challenge or the problem or the issue that has come up from our from feedback from stakeholders and constituent groups. So as Samantha was saying, as you start to categorize them, it's important before you start building or before you start project planning for specific ideas, it's important to have a gut check on, hey, is this thing feasible? Is this thing going to have the impact that we want it to have? Is this idea the right idea from the 50 other ideas that we've come up with? And so we have a few considerations that we have used with districts that have always been really helpful to kind of gut check. At this point in the process, we have these really amazing ideas, but do they pass this test? And if they do, then if they are implemented with fidelity, we're likely to see the movement in the needle in some way. But it is important, and sometimes we find that districts forget to do this step. It's important to gut check and see if the ideas that you've come up with are these 4 things. And so I'll give you all a moment to read what you see on the slide, and I'll just kind of give you an overview. Your ideas need to be concrete. Is this thing a concrete thing that can be implemented at the school level or the district level? Is it measurable? As a district leader or a school leader, can I measure the impact over time? Can I monitor it? Is it aligned to our strategic direction, that roof of the house? Is it aligned to our mission and vision and values and core beliefs? Does it solve our challenge statements? And is it both ambitious and feasible? So is it going to change the status quo, but also can it be done? And so an example we used recently was one of the ideas that came up in a recent planning team meeting was a staff wellness program. And so we took what had come up in terms of brainstorming about what the staff wellness program could look like, and we walked it through these 4 gut checks, and we wanted to make sure that it passed. And we answered yes on all of those things. And if it did, then potentially that would be one of the projects or one of the ideas that that in actuality will bring your focus area and your pillar to life. We're going to move on to the second strategy, and that is cultivating the right teams. I'm going to pass it on to Samantha. But while Samantha is sharing the next slide, I will also be reading the chat and just kind of pulling out some of the things that have come out from your reflections in the chat.
Yeah. So as far as cultivating the right teams, y'all, it's really important to think about your teams in 3 different buckets. So you'll have your project team, which is the district leads, and these folks will provide general project oversight, co-manage planning, logistics, and communications, and they'll make and communicate decisions on guardrails. But then you'll want to expand this out to a steering committee, which they'll be able to provide input and feedback to the project team. Like I said, it's really important that everyone is talking to each other, right? That they'll be able to lead engagement activities, participate in the creation of strategic direction. So maybe it's realigning on mission, vision, values, and focus areas, because perhaps if you just have a few people doing this, then the whole community is not involved. So it's important to get more voices in the circle. And another option for steering committee is that they'll be able to lead and participate in the planning team meetings, of course, if they have time to do so, and then share their learnings back to the rest of the steering committee. And finally, you'll want to then create planning teams, and planning teams should be dispersed. Our project and steering committee should be dispersed throughout planning teams to make sure that there are lead voices in there, and they'll be able to solicit feedback from stakeholders and represent stakeholder voice, provide input and feedback on key decisions, outline and execute on the work of the strategic plan, and engage other teams as necessary. For example, grade level teams. There was a comment in the chat about like creating educator confidence and capacity. And I was like, that would be great. Like, you'll want to be able to involve educator voices so that they feel part of the conversation, right? And part of the decision making. And of course, you want to have your project team leading some of these decisions, but that the decision should really be made by the school community.
Just want to frame what Samantha shared as kind of the year zero. And so if you're thinking about renewing your strategic plan or writing a new plan, this is the teaming structure that we have found time and time again has worked for districts in terms of actually putting together a strategic plan. And usually that process takes anywhere from 4 or 5 months up to a school year. And then that's what we usually call year zero. And then on this next slide, an example of what starting in year one and beyond, what that teaming structure can look like. And that hopefully that also resonates with, I think it was Elena's comment about rebuilding educator capacity and comfort. To reiterate, and I'll reiterate something that Samantha shared as well. And so this is an example of some real life work that we're doing with a district. And so one of the districts that we're working with is just now embarking on the first year of implementation. They just finished their strategic plan. They're about to publish it. They're about to unveil it to their community. And this is the last school year. And this school year is the first year of implementation. And so as you're thinking about building buy-in and ensuring representation from different constituent groups across the community, you want to still think about these structures of a project team, a steering team that really measures impact and ensures that all of the work is aligned to the vision, that supports with stakeholder engagement, that monitors the metrics that you're putting together. But then also thinking about implementation teams. The way that we've seen it work usually is if you have 4 pillars or if you have 4 focus areas, you probably want to have 4 implementation teams, 3 to 3, 1 to 1, etc. Initiatives and strategies, process management, communicating updates. And it is a very, not to use a buzzy word, I hate to use a buzzy word, but it is a very, synergetic process. We really like to see the implementation teams have representation from the steering team, that the project teams members sit on implementation teams as well, and that all of these different groups, like Samantha was saying, are talking to each other. On the right, you'll see another example of a similar teaming structure, and this is a district that one of their focus areas is this idea of shared decision making. And so some of the ideas that some of the initiatives aligned to that pillar include administering a climate survey and analyzing data from the climate survey. It includes putting together a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and allowing that committee to come up with projects and ideas that will impact the entire district. One of the really cool things that they came up with, this idea of a decision-making protocol flowchart, so that everybody in the district understands how district leaders and the board members get to specific decisions and how decisions are made, to build transparency and visibility into that process. And then thinking about another example was this idea of a responsive leadership series that they want to develop and administer to their school leaders and their district leaders. And so you can also think about, you can think about this implementation on the left, a similar structure to what we've shared in a few slides previously, or you can think about different subcommittees that are actively working towards different initiatives or different projects that are aligned to a particular pillar. And to Elena's point, building educator buy-in and confidence, one of the districts that we're supporting with, a couple of their pillars are centered around the student experience. And so thinking about, building real world experiences for students, upping student engagement. And so one thing that we saw in the past and historically in this district is that there is a lack of staff buy-in. So the community is very bought in, the district admin and the school leaders are very bought in, but there is a kind of a a hindrance when it comes to staff and educators and teachers being bought into some of these initiatives. And so one of the things that we really encourage this district to do is to think about how can you cultivate your teams from within your staff? How can you bring this work directly into schools and have your school leaders and principals be the ambassadors of this work? Because your school leaders are bought in, but how can you cultivate and amass your ranks in these implementation teams from within your staff? And so that's something that that district is currently working on to a lot of success. And that is attributed to this idea of, we see that staff is not bought in. Historically, they have not been bought in. We gathered their feedback. There are some things that some of these ideas are direct responses to the feedback that we gathered from staff and teachers. It's not the district leader's job. It's not the parents and the community members that are sitting on these teams to bring this to life, just them. We also want representation from the educators and the teachers in the buildings. And so that's one way that you can really build buy-in from the staff. And so moving on to the third strategy is this idea of establishing structures to monitor the progress of your initiative. So it's one thing to say, here's our focus areas, and then here's our projects, here's our teams. But as the work is actually, as the rubber hits the road and the work is actually happening, how can you make sure that the work that you're doing is actually contributing to the impact that you would want it to have?
Yeah, and so there are two key resources that combine as a strategic plan, right? We've been talking a lot about this. And the first thing is a strategic direction. And so this is actually a example on the left-hand side of a strategic plan that we made for a district in New York. And they called it Journey of a Learner. And what that document does is it serves to codify the strategic direction and priority areas of the district for the next 5 years. Within this strategic plan, they have all of their initiatives. They had 5 initiatives that they wanted to take on, and explained what they are, as well as a clear mission, vision, and values statement within this document. And it is community facing, public facing. They are posting it all over the school. Teachers know about it, students know about it. And so it's a really great way to get the message out there of like, what are we doing in our school district for the next 5 years, right? And then second is the implementation dashboard, some type of way to have a track towards progress towards each of the goals that you just articulated in the strategic plan or the strategic direction. It's really important that you have structures in place to actually implement these ideas, because we all know that things get really busy. You have a million things on your plate. And so having a one-stop shop like an implementation dashboard can be really helpful in order to execute some of the ideas that you have in your strategic direction or your strategic plan.
We found that it is really helpful to have both an actual physical document that, there's always that fear that, we have a strategic plan, but it's sitting on the shelf and it's collecting dust. We put together so much, it's a labor of love, so much time and effort from all different facets of the community came together to and was poured into this plan, but it's just sitting on the shelf. And people look at it, it's our strategic plan, it's on our website, but it's not, for any number of reasons, we're not living it out. And so, like Samantha was saying, it is important in some way, and we found that it's important to have a transparent way to have visibility into the progress of the work that's being done for your entire community. And so considering something like, a public-facing plan or implementation status updates or something like that that can be hosted on your website, that's something that we found has been really helpful in generating buy-in from all different constituent groups in your community. And then there's this idea of keeping track of your strategic plan by thinking about key metrics throughout the course of the 5 years of its lifespan. And we usually like to think of these metrics as 3 tiers. We call the first one, and these are all also very buzzy. And so, we'll give you the names, but then we'll also tell you what each of these mean. So the first one is this idea of fidelity metrics. And then beyond that is the effectiveness metrics. And then finally, the impact metrics. The first layer, the first tier of metrics is fidelity. Did we do the thing? If we said that we were going to create a flow chart for our decision-making process, did we actually create a flow chart? And that can be a simple yes or no, like, did we do this thing? And if I, as a parent in the district, can go in and see, oh, hey, they created a flow chart, they are on track. I'm really interested in this particular initiative, in this particular project. I see that they created a flow chart. That's that first tier. The extent to which the initiative was implemented. Did we do the thing? The next tier is effectiveness. The extent to which the initiative that was implemented produced the desired effect. For example, with this idea of a decision-making protocol that was created, that was turned into a flow chart, a question that you might ask is, are people using the flow chart? Or did we use the flow chart in the most recent board meeting? That could be a measure of effectiveness. Are we using the flow chart at our board meetings? And finally, this idea of impact, thinking long-term over the course of 5 years, the extent to which long-term and sustained changes occurred in the target population or based on the specific initiative. And we found that if you're able, as a group of constituents that are working with the district, or if you are in the district working towards living out your strategic plan and implementing the plan, if you're able to articulate metrics that are aligned to these three ideas, fidelity, effectiveness, and impact, it makes it really, really less challenging to actually monitor progress towards the goals that you've articulated for yourselves in the district. And we found recently in all of the work that we've done, especially in the past year with districts supporting the creation and development of strategic plans, that they all want to use this system. They all want to use this terminology and this mental model around, these are 3 tiers of metrics and 3 tiers of progress monitoring checkpoints, so to speak, that we can use to just make sure that we are on track for each of the initiatives that we've identified for the work. And so the last thing that we'll share is, so we've shared 3 templates. I told you we have a lot of templates today. This is an example. This is a blank template that we've used recently with several of our districts. That has gotten, a lot of positive reviews from the districts that we work with as a way to keep track of implementation and monitoring. And so there's another link that Samantha is going to put in the chat. It is also a forced copy link, but you can see that for each pillar or focus area, for each of the initiatives that have been identified, as the team that's in charge of this work, you can identify over the course of the next 5 years, what phase of implementation it might be in. Are you just researching this initiative? Are you actually ready to implement this initiative? And so on and so forth. And then you'll see in the template itself, you'll see examples of a tab at the bottom where you can actually create tabs for each school year. So there's an overall tab, and then there's a tab for each school year. So in school year 22-23, these are the initiatives that these are just the initiatives that are going to be implemented. And actually, it might be helpful to give you a quick visual. So it looks like this. And again, this is a copy. You can create your own copy and do with it as you will. But then you'll see that there's also a template that we provide that's like a year-over-year template. So for example, in school year 22-23, this is the focus area. This is the maybe this pillar 1, and these are the initiatives in pillar 1. These are both maybe in the implementation phase. And then here's essentially a project plan. Here's the person that's leading, here are the team members, when does the work start and end, what are the checkpoints, and then when does the next phase start? And a few of our districts are actually taking some version of this and making it public facing, hosting a version of this on their website so that any community member can come in, click into the district website, go to the strategic plan page, landing page, and then actually see, hey, this is what they said that they were doing, and this is where they are in the process. And I think it has proven to be extremely powerful in generating transparency and visibility into the process, and ultimately buy-in and trust amongst all of the constituent groups in your community. We are at the end of our presentation. I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that we have a couple more upcoming events and webinars. If you go to @elements.com/engage-motivate, the same landing page that you probably found the link to sign up for this webinar, there's a couple more webinars that are happening before the end of November 22. And you'll also be able to see all of the other webinars that happened over the course, since August, over the course of the past couple of months. And then before you jump off, a couple more FYIs for you. We have an event in Orlando between November 30th and December 1st that you can register. This is an event around teacher retention, and it's called Recruiting and Retaining Our Teacher Workforce. So if you're interested in attending this event, an immersive institute, feel free to follow the link and sign up for that event. Again, it's around teacher retention.